we are beginning to be able to write the code of life. So when we think about a technology that's readable, that's writable, and that's hackable, all of us naturally think about information technology. But what's really happening now, why this is such a revolutionary moment, is that our biology is coming to be seen as yet another form of information technology. And that's why we have all of these expectations that our machines will get better, our iPhones will get smaller and faster. But when we think about humans 200 years from now, 300 years from now, in our sci-fi movies and elsewhere, humans are kind of like us. But after 3.8 billion years of evolving by one set of rules, which we call the Darwinian principles of random mutation and natural selection, our species is now turning an evolutionary corner. And from this point on, we are going to evolve and begin evolving by an entirely new set of rules of self-guided mutation and self-selected mutation, and self-selection. And the implications of this are beyond monumental. One easy way of thinking about this is if we had a time machine and we traveled 1,000 years into the past and we took a baby and brought that baby back to today and placed that baby with a family, that child would grow up to be indistinguishable from any person in this room. But go 1,000 years into the future and bring a child back, and that child would be a genetic Superman or Superwoman. They would be immune to all kinds of diseases that afflict us. They would live longer, healthier, more robust lives. They would have qualities that we now associate with human outliers, like our greatest geniuses or people with all kinds of skills, whether it's music, art, or all sorts of things. And I know what you're thinking, and we'll talk about the ethics. And this person would just be incredible by today's standards, but normal by the standards of the future. And it's easy to come in a stage like this with techno-futurists like all of you and say, we're going to this crazy place, and I myself am a science fiction writer. And if we didn't already have the technology to do all of the things that I've mentioned so far, this would just be a futurist sci-fi talk. But in fact, all of the technologies that we need to fundamentally transform our species aren't yet to be invented. They have already been invented. And all we need to do is continue developing those technologies, not even at the rate as fast as we've already done, but even at a slower rate. And in the not distant future, we will be rewriting the code of our lives.
As you can see, scientists have already invented technology to hack the human genome. The plan is to transform the population so that they are no longer fully human. Why would they want to rewrite the genetic code? Was something wrong with the one written by the creator of heaven and earth? No, but that's what they want us to believe. They want us to believe that they can do things better. They want us to ignore the sins that created the problems in the first place. The enemy has deceived them into thinking that they can now create a superhuman. What we're witnessing is an act of rebellion. This is the same spirit of rebellion that began with Lucifer. He is now enacting his diabolical plans through mankind. This is the 7th session in the series, Science Proving Scripture to be True. In this session, we will see how the wickedness that began with the kingdom of Babylon passed down to the other 3 kingdoms identified by the prophet Daniel. It is now time to reveal how the West dominated the world. Let's take another look at the book of Enoch, chapter 10, verses 11 through 12. It says, "All the sons of men shall not perish in consequence of every secret by which the watchers have destroyed and which they have taught their offspring. All the earth has been corrupted by the effects of the teaching of Isaiah. To him, therefore, ascribe the whole crime." So this knowledge came from the fallen. They gave knowledge to their offspring. And I'm sure you can figure out why. But note that it says all of the sons of men will not perish because of the actions of the watchers. But the children of darkness, they love this corrupt knowledge because it feeds into their pride. Romans 1:28 through 32 confirms that this is a spirit of rebellion. Listen to this. It says, and even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which are not convenient, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, maliciousness, full of envy, murder, debate, deceit, malignity, whisperers, backbiters, haters of God, despiteful, proud, boasters, inventors of evil things, disobedient to parents, without understanding, covenant breakers, without natural affection, implacable, unmerciful, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. The bottom line is that they hate the Almighty, and as a result, they rebel against His ordinances and become their own gods. Scripture tells us that they are deserving of death. Take note of the fact that it says the ones who approve of such practices are deserving of the same. This is the spirit of Babylon, the head of gold described in the book of Daniel. And for this reason, the people of the Most High must come out of her and be separate. Rid yourself of the mindset, the practices, and the customs of this wicked system. Now let's do a recap of the 4 empires from Nebuchadnezzar's vision. The empires were Babylon, representing the head of gold, followed by the Medes and Persians. Then the Grecian Empire would be the 3rd kingdom to rule, and the last empire would be Rome. Now the legs of iron represents the Roman Empire that is supposed to be in power when Yeshua comes to destroy it. But how can that be if historians say that the Roman Empire ended in 476 AD? What are we missing? Now, I think it helps if we compare the vision that Daniel saw to the one that John saw in the book of Revelation, because many of us believe that the ruling power representing the beast system in the last days is Mystery Babylon. So we see some differences between the vision of Daniel and the vision of John. Now, Daniel saw a lion with eagle's wings. John only saw the mouth of a lion. Daniel saw 4 beasts arise out of the sea, while John saw only 1 beast with attributes similar to the beasts of Daniel. And what John saw is the 4 kingdoms morphed into this beast system, this global system. The statue in Nebuchadnezzar's dream represented kingdoms in specific geographical locations. For example, Babylon. And then you had the combination of the Medes and the Persian empires. Then you had Greece and Rome. But as we look at the ruling powers in the last days, we have to keep in mind that something happened when Constantine came to power. He moved the seat of Roman power to Constantinople in Turkey. So the seat of power was no longer in Rome. He moved it to Turkey. Kings ruled from a seat of power. So this final kingdom is the final seat of power that represents the 4 empires. It embodies all of the customs, laws, structure, and the religious system of Babylon. Now, which nation comes to mind when you think of a nation that embodies all of the wickedness of the empires in Daniel's vision? Immediately what comes to mind for me is America. This nation is rotten to the core, but it has a facade of being a righteous nation. And that is what Constantine did when he merged Christianity with the Roman Empire. At the core, Rome was still a pagan nation, but it used the religion or the shell of a religion to conquer through the Roman Catholic Church. Let's look at this article, and it's entitled Constantine and the Significance of His Reign. It says the cultural and religious crisis through which the Roman Empire was passing in the 4th century is one of the most significant events in the history of the world. The old pagan culture came into collision with Christianity, which received official recognition during the reign of Constantine at the beginning of the 4th century and was declared the dominant state religion by Theodosius. So it says, it might have seemed at first that these two clashing elements representing two diametrically opposed points of view would never find a basis for mutual agreement. But Christianity and pagan Hellenism did intermix, gradually to form a Christian Greco-Eastern culture, subsequently known as Byzantine. Its center was the new capital of the Roman Empire, Constantinople. And you all, this is the beginning of that merging or this morphing into this one beast system. Now, this information is significant because it's going to help you see how another shift will be made later, and we see the seat of power move to the United States. So stay with me. So let's see what happened at the Council of Nicaea, and this comes from ancient origins. It says, the Council of Nicaea, also known as the First Council of Nicaea, was the first ecumenical council of the Christian Church. This council, which convened in 325 AD, so 325 years after the death of Messiah, it says it was assembled by the Roman Emperor Constantine. I need you to wrap your brain around that. We're talking about the same Roman Empire that put Messiah to death and persecuted his followers, that empire. They're now coming together to discuss theological issues, particularly the teachings of Arius or Arianism. One of the most important outcomes of the Council of Nicaea was the formulation of the Nicene Creed, which is still used as a profession of faith by many of the Christian denominations. Most of them use the Nicene Creed. So this is extremely important for you to get this, because you need to see how the Roman Empire morphed into a new ruling power under the banner of Christianity. Let's keep going. So let's connect the Roman Empire to Babylon, because we're no longer looking at a geographical location in Iraq. It has morphed into something else. It's a beast system that represents the spirit of Babylon. We see here in Revelation 17:5, John says, and upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. So John says the name of the harlot is a mystery. A mystery is not something that cannot be known, but simply that which is not known until it's revealed. It's the woman's identity that's a mystery. So If Babylon the Great is referencing a rebuilt city of Babylon in Iraq, its name wouldn't be a mystery. But look here, Peter identifies Rome as Babylon. Peter says in 1 Peter 5:13, the church that is at Babylon, elected together with you, saluteth you, and so does Marcus, my son. Peter identifies Rome as Babylon. Why? Because it's talking about a seat of power, representing everything that the Babylonian kingdom was. So Revelation 17:5 indicates that the name refers to some future ruling power whose identity was not revealed at the time of the writing, but it embodies everything that Babylon was. And we can certainly see those traits in the European nations, and especially America. The most popular belief held by Bible scholars today is that the 10 toes represent a European confederacy. And which nation is leading the pack? America. So let's talk about the rise of the Western world, because historians are still confused by how Europe came to dominate the world by the 20th century. Many theories have been presented to explain how it happened. For example, some say Europe became industrialized more quickly and therefore became wealthier than the rest of the world, or they say that Europeans began to travel the world and the people in the other countries just didn't have the immunity to fight the diseases that the Europeans brought with them. So it wiped out a lot of those populations and Europeans were able to go in and take the land. Well, let's read this excerpt from this Caltech article entitled, "Why Did Western Europe Dominate the Globe?" It says, although Europe represents only about 8% of the planet's landmass, from 1492 to 1914, Europeans conquered or colonized more than 80% of the entire world. Being dominated for centuries has led to lingering inequality and long-lasting effects in many formerly colonized countries, including poverty and slow economic growth. There are many possible explanations for why history played out this way, but few can explain why the West was so powerful for so long. Let's continue. It says gunpowder was really important for conquering territory. It allows a small number of people to exercise a lot of influence. The technology grew to include more than just guns, armed ships, fortifications that can resist artillery, and more. And the Europeans became the best at using these things. So, family, let's put it all together. We're talking about Europe only representing 8% of the planet's landmass, but they conquered and colonized 80% of the entire world. Please let that sink in. Family, where did this knowledge come from? And take note that it said this all began around 1492. Well, what was happening in 1492? Let's dig a little deeper to see if we can find out how the West dominated the world. Now, this article is from Foreign Affairs. It says how Europe conquered the world. Let's read some of this. It says between 1492 and 1914, Europeans conquered 84% of the globe, establishing colonies and spreading their influence across every inhabited continent. This was not inevitable. In fact, for decades, historians, social scientists, and biologists have wondered why and how did Europe rise to the top even when societies in Asia and the Middle East were far more advanced. So far, satisfactory answers have been elusive, but this question is of the utmost importance given that Europe's power determined everything from who ran the slave trade to who grew rich or remained mired in poverty. This information comes from the History Reader. It's entitled An American Slavery Timeline, 1492 to 1776. It says slavery in America began in the early 17th century and continued to be practiced for the next 250 years by the colonies and states. Slaves, mostly from Africa, worked in the production of tobacco crops and later cotton. With the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, along with the growing demand for the product in Europe, the use of slaves in the South became a foundation of their economy. So is it just a coincidence that Western Europe just suddenly come into knowledge about weaponry that helped them dominate the rest of the world? And this is all happening when they start enslaving our people. Remember that the 4 empires from the book of Daniel all had periods of enslaving our people. But the last one was a crushing force. It was under the final kingdom that we would be scattered around the world. Now think about the sins of the previous empires that I've covered already. We should see those at an even higher level. It should be increasing at a global level, considering that we're living in the days of the final empire, which tells us we're in the last days. We're in the end of the ages. So the divided kingdom and the 10 toes. What types of sin do we see? Use your eyes here on this one, because this matter right here seems to be of great importance for governments around the world. This article comes from the Council on Foreign Relations, and it says the landscape is changing. They're pushing for greater acceptance. They've been actively working to secure rights for this group. And I'm sure that some of you notice how it is heavily marketed to our people. It seems that's the face that they want to put out there. This says, study finds German Catholic priests sexually abuse over 600 victims. Hasn't this been an ongoing problem, family? The logical answer should be to allow them to marry, but think about the information I covered about the Grecian Empire, and you'll see that there's no real desire to solve this issue. This comes from the Atlantic. It says, why witchcraft is on the rise. It says, casting spells and assembling altars have become quite lucrative. You can attend a fall equinox ritual organized by Airbnb. Sign up for subscription witch boxes offering the equivalent of Blue Apron for magic making, and buy aura cleanses on Etsy. Instagram's reigning witch influencer, Brie Luna, has more than 450,000 followers and has collaborated with Coach, Refinery 21, and Smashbox, for which she recently introduced a line of cosmetics inspired by the transformative quality of crystals. And in case you missed it, McDonald's now sells occultic tarot card readings with burgers and fries. This from the BBC says, the people who drink human blood. In most major cities around the world, communities of ordinary people, nurses, bar staff, secretaries, are drinking human blood on a regular basis. The question is, why? This article from Insider says modern society may be built on a terrifying legacy of human sacrifice. So where did it come from? The rituals taught by the fallen included human sacrifices. You all, we have not scratched the surface on how many people are actually being sacrificed by the ruling elite. The article says human sacrifice is not a rare or isolated human behavior. It's been done throughout recorded history by Arab, Germanic, American, Inuit, Austronesian, African, Chinese, and Japanese cultures. The practice even survived into the 20th century. Killing someone as an offering sends a strong message. As the team of psychologists and historians behind the new study put it, human sacrifice legitimizes class-based power distinctions by combining displays of ultimate authority, the taking of life, with supernatural justifications that sanctify authority as divinely ordained. So I think we get the picture that the things the fallen taught mankind is still in operation today. When we look at the increasing levels of sexual perversion, murder, sorcery, and other wicked practices that has made its way into the mainstream, it should tell us that the children of darkness are still playing the game of pay to play. They have to do wicked acts to get the knowledge they want. They have to appease their gods. And a lot of it is out in the open, but we didn't have eyes to see. So how did America get her power? Was it really because it's a Christian nation devoted unto God? I want you to take a look at this image. It's called the Apotheosis of Washington. It was painted in 1865. The Apotheosis of Washington is in the eye of the U.S. Capitol building's rotunda, and it depicts George Washington rising to the heavens in glory, and he's flanked by these female figures that's supposed to represent liberty and victory. Now, this nation, the capital of this nation, named Washington, D.C., is, of course, named after him because he was the first president of the United States. But this man was at the highest levels of Freemasonry. What you're looking at is a depiction of a stargate or a portal. I'll just read a snippet from this article from history. And it says, George Washington becomes a master mason. It says, George Washington, a young Virginia planter, becomes a master mason, the highest basic rank in the secret fraternity of Freemasonry. The ceremony was held at the Masonic Lodge No. 4 in Fredericksburg, Virginia. Washington was 21 years old and would soon command his first military operation as a major in the Virginia Colonial Militia. Let's read to see who these figures are that are surrounding him, because you're going to see that these are deities, the same ones that passed down from the preceding three empires. And the link is here if you want to continue reading. But it says 6 groups of figures line the perimeter of the canopy, talking about this area around him. It says the following list begins below the central group and proceeds clockwise. So you have a figure representing war. It says with armed freedom and the eagle defeating tyranny and kingly power. Then you have a figure representing science, and it describes this one as Minerva, teaching Benjamin Franklin, Robert Fulton, and Samuel F.B. Morse. Then you have another one that represents marine. Think about the marine kingdom. It says this one has Neptune holding his trident and Venus holding the transatlantic cable, which was being laid at the time the fresco was painted. Another figure represents commerce. Now the deity here is Mercury, handing a bag of money to Robert Morris, financier of the American Revolution. Another deity represents mechanics. This one has Vulcan at the anvil and forge, producing a cannon and a steam engine. And then you have another one representing agriculture, with Ceres seated on the McCormick Reaper, accompanied by America in a red Liberty cap and Flora picking flowers. Now let's look at these images more closely. So what we see here is George Washington, and he's flanked by these women. Supposedly they are women, but it says that depicted as George Washington rising to the heavens in glory, flanked by female figures representing liberty and victory or fame. So you see, this is supposed to be him rising up into the heavens. And that's why I say what you're witnessing or what you're looking at is really a portal. The next one that we have here is war. We talked about that previously. This is supposed to be armored freedom. The sword is raised, you can see here, and the cape is flying. Think about that. Think about that, the superheroes. So it's reminiscent of those on the Statue of Freedom, supposedly trampling tyranny and kingly power. And she's assisted by a fierce eagle carrying arrows and thunderbolts. Think about the mythological deity they refer to as Thor. Let's keep going. Here, this deity is supposed to represent science. This is Minerva, goddess of wisdom and the arts of civilization. And you can see her helmet and her spear in her hand, and she points to an electric generator here, creating power stored in batteries. Who taught all of this, you all? So next to it is the printing press, and you can see inventors like Benjamin Franklin. You see others like Samuel F.B. Morse and Robert Fulton as they watch. And then you have on the left side a teacher who's demonstrating the use of dividers. This one here is representing the marine kingdom. Here you have Neptune, god of the sea, and he's holding his trident. Look at this. He's crowned with seaweed, rides in a shell chariot drawn by seahorses. Venus, goddess of love, born from the sea, helps lay the transatlantic cable. In the background is a form of an ironclad ship with smokestacks. And this one we have Vulcan, the god of the forge, standing at his anvil with his foot on a cannon, near a pile of cannonballs and with a steam engine in the background. The man at the forge is thought to represent Charles Thomas, who was in charge of the ironwork of the Capitol Dome. Now this final one is representing agriculture. It says Ceres, the goddess of agriculture, is shown with a wreath of wheat and a cornucopia, seated on a McCormick Reaper. Young America, in a liberty cap, holds the reins of the horses, while Flora gathers flowers in the foreground. Family, these images are showing us how America paid tribute to her gods. This nation was paying homage to the gods they believe gave them the knowledge to build this nation. Think about this. The nation was supposedly a Christian nation. So why are there no pictures of the Bible or the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man they called Jesus represented in these images? No. This is an accurate description of the gods of this nation. This apotheosis is telling the story of how the nation rose to power and the deities they credit with doing it. And who did they use for slave labor? Please pause and think on that. So when you see and hear this slogan right here, it would be a great idea to ask, do you really know how it was made great the first time? Because it seems strange that there is no known explanation for how the West came to dominate the world in such a short period of time. Where did the knowledge come from? If you look at the advancements made by these nations, I believe that their knowledge in science and technology is proving Scripture to be true, that this knowledge comes from elsewhere. I hope this series has helped you to see the influence of the Babylonian culture in these nations. It's the same system, you all. The United States used Greek ideology to develop their democracy and the city-states. So when you see the wicked behaviors I covered in the series, know that you're looking at things released into the earth when the fallen taught men forbidden knowledge. And you can tell when demonic forces are in control of a nation by observing its laws. Their laws are an indication of the deities they serve. The evidence is clear that America is being controlled by princes in high places, principalities. They made an exchange with these entities, and the people of the land are being offered up as sacrificial lambs. This is what the grove is all about. If you don't know about that, please look it up. The children of darkness are operating under a covenant. This covenant has not worked for us because they are seeking knowledge to do evil. But we should be using knowledge to do good. That's the true representation of our Father. He is good, and He looks well to the needs of His children. But just know that the Most High has made a way of escape for us. So it's time for us to turn and repent, seek His will and His ways. I would also encourage you to not allow yourself to become overwhelmed by all of the wicked things going on around us. The things you focus on most will magnify. So focus on what the Most High is doing. Look for His hand in all of this. And also in Jeremiah 23, He promised to raise up shepherds. So keep praying for that, because our people need direction and guidance. But we can't lose heart, Israel. Believe Yah and live. Until next time, shalom everyone.